Hello YouTube and welcome back to Kind Heart Homestead. My name is Ben and I'm up here on our off-grid property in the mountains of Virginia. Rather than recording a personal intro, I'm going to skip right through that and pick up directly where we left off on the previous episode of our chicken coop build series. If you are new here, welcome to the channel. I recommend you go back and watch the first two episodes in this series where we build the platform, the stud walls, and the rafters. The focus of this video is basically the roof covering and the wall coverings, which is mostly metal on this build. You can see here I'm installing these 3-foot metal corrugated panels. This is the same style metal roofing that you see on our solar shed in the background there. That's another series that we completed a few years ago. So if you're interested in that build, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and look back through our videos. The general rule of thumb for these panels is you want to have screws every 2 feet going up the panel. That's usually the farthest the manufacturer recommends spacing the screws, and that's why I have those horizontal furring strips that are recessed down into the oversized rafters above. So these panels are 3 feet wide, like I said, but then they also have a flange that extends past the 3 feet. I believe it's 1.5 to 2 inches, and that allows it to overlap the previous panel. And it's important to overlap because otherwise water would fall in between the panels. And I'm not using any sort of butyl tape. I'm just using the gravity method to shed water down from the ridge over the edge of the overhangs. These are very oversized overhangs, but we want to be able to lean as much stuff as we can find around this building and keep it out of the weather. So you can see I'm installing these one panel at a time. As long as I can get one screw in, then I'm confident enough to get up on the ladder without it blowing away and secure it from the top. It's the middle row of screws that's the most difficult. But using a ladder, I'm barely able to reach them with my impact driver. These are special screws that are designed to go through this metal, and I'm actually not punching any holes ahead of time. Here's a close-up of the structural ridge beam, complete with ridge venting on either side of it, and you can see there's some drip edge that I installed off camera before installing the metal roofing. So what you just witnessed was the roof installation on the south slope of the gable roof. I did the same process to the north slope, but it was off camera, and now I'm installing the ridge cap, and that basically spans the gap between the two roof slopes to shed water away from the ridge vent. And the vent is just a gap between the roofing surface just above the structural ridge beam. In a house, you would probably have a wooden roof deck that you would have to cut the top off of to allow the heat to escape. But with just furring strips, there was plenty of circulation under these metal panels. So now I just fold the ends over to prevent birds from nesting and secure it to the metal panels using sheet metal screws. In my experience, it's pretty tricky to access the center of a metal roof because if you put all of your weight on what you're working on, it tends to warp the ridge and make it difficult to secure. So what I like to do is back up my farm truck and use a extension ladder roughly the same slope as the roof to access the ridge, and that allows me just somewhere to displace the body weight that's not directly on top of the piece that I'm working on. So where I'm sitting right now is around the splice point, which is like the overlap of the two ridge cap pieces. I mentioned earlier that I need two. So one of them is a full 10 feet, the other one is cut shorter, and there's a few inches of overlap. But the problem is I can't eyeball the straightness because I'm so close to the end that all I have visibility of is the short piece. So Angie's helping me by being my eyes on the ridge. She's straightening the ridge cap by centering the peak of it with the joint of the gable end framing. So she's able to use her laser eye, square it up, and then I secure it in place with those sheet metal screws. So now let's work on the wall coverings. All right, I'm trying my best to sneak into the frame here. This is the opening for us to shovel out the wood chips
We're doing the deep litter method, or whatever it's called, and we need to be able once a year to push everything out. But before I put the siding up back here, I want to protect this edge of the linoleum flooring. So what I'm going to do is use zip tape. This is not an approved use for it, but this is a chicken coop. I just need something that's going to prevent water from getting under there. We are going to have a little 2x8 door. This is 7 1/4. I might have to round over one of the corners, but it's going to be hinged and it's going to allow us to either flip it down or flip it up and just rake everything out. So let's protect the edge right now.
Zip tape is a waterproofing product, and it's meant to secure the butt joints or the penetrations in your zip sheathing, typically around windows and doors. But you can also use it just as a generic waterproofing tape for other applications. It's just not going to be warrantied by Huber.
All right, that's it. After I put the wooden sheathing, we're going to use that T111 with the vertical grooves. I'm going to put that over this. It's going to have a hole cut out for this area. And then I'll do another round of zip tape to kind of cover that lip. So when we're raking stuff, it doesn't get stuck in between the siding and the rim joist here. That's pretty much it for the tape. I just want to let you know that zip tape has a pressure activated adhesive, and this is a proprietary zip roller. You could probably use any roller if you're not worried about warranty, but by putting my body weight behind this roller, it really activates that adhesive and gets it to stick. So I'm not too concerned about this coming off, but if it does, I can always add more tape.
That brings us to the siding on the rear end of this chicken coop. Like I mentioned before, I pre-notched this to account for that little door opening to shovel out the poopy wood chips at the end of each year. I pre-cut this using the same angle as the roof pitch. As you can see, it overlaps the outside rafter about halfway through. It probably doesn't need that much overlap, but it definitely makes this a lot more sturdy. Since there's no foundation for this building, there was nothing for me to set these pieces of plywood on to take the weight for me to remove my hands and operate the nail gun. So I had to get Angie to help me, and I came up with this fulcrum method where we have several blocks on the floor and we put a large 2x4 through, and Angie simply stands on it to lift the weight. This is going to be the only fully structurally sheathed wall on the entire build, and I'm going to remove that diagonal brace after this is installed. So I'm going to put nails every 6 inches or less to keep this as rigid as possible. Now that the back is fully braced, it's time to move on to the long walls. As you can see here, there's so many braces going on, it's kind of hard to explain. But the longest braces are temporary. Those are on the inside of the building, and I'll be able to remove those with my impact driver later. But just under the metal panel I'm installing is a permanent brace that I recessed inside of the second stud from the end on each side. And this is a hypotenuse of a triangle, which means it will not allow the building to deform in that direction. I only have to worry about that one plane with these braces because, like I said before, the rear bracing is done structurally through the T111 plywood panel. So this is 5V roofing that I'm installing horizontally as siding. This is the cheapest metal roofing available, and it's also what you see out in the country on top of barns. It's a very thin gauge material, and I would not rely on it in any capacity to be a structural sheathing, and that's why those braces are so important. I think there is a thicker gauge metal you could use that's rated for structural sheathing, but this is not it. The only customization I have to do is notch it out for the overhanging rafters. And I decided to notch it instead of rip it, so I'd have a flange to secure to the bird blocking. I have a whole stack of 8-foot pieces of this 5V metal roofing, so to fill up the remaining 4 feet on that wall, I need to cut pieces in half. That'll give me 4-foot segments. I have several tools at my disposal to cut through metal, but most of them make short work of anything that's flat stock. When you're dealing with 5V roofing panels, the trickiest part is getting over those V-crimps because they're so small and pointy that even handheld snips have a hard time navigating that terrain. So I'm using a metal cutoff wheel on my angle grinder, and the wheel is barely deep enough to get through that V. And I do want to point out that if you make this whole cut in one clean pass, it does sand down the abrasive edges on the metal, making it a bit safer to handle. 3 panels run horizontally is all I need to span from the base of this building up to the roof line. And I'm using the same type of screws that I use to secure the roofing. And these are gasketed with a neoprene washer, and that prevents water from accessing the hole. And just like the other panels, I have to notch the top row to fit snugly around all of the overhanging rafters. Once I have all these screws in place, it's time to move on to the other side. And I did that all off camera, and now this is the result. You can see in this wide angle shot that 3 out of the 4 walls are complete. And I don't really want to restrict my lighting and access by adding the 4th wall, so I'm going to go ahead and frame out my partition wall first, which just separates the human foyer from the chicken roosting area. And I decided to align that with studs and rafters just to make it a very clean partition. This is roughly 1/3 of the length of the building, and I'm cutting these 2x4s at the same angle as the rafters, just so they also act as additional support vertically, which takes some of the stress off of the splice point in the structural ridge beam. I had to build it in 2 pieces because I didn't have any lumber long enough, and I felt like that was a pretty easy solution since we needed a partition wall anyway. The 2x8 on the floor acts as a barrier to prevent the wood chips from overflowing into the foyer. Another reason why I was waiting on the framing for the front wall is because I didn't really know what design I wanted yet for the door, and the width of the door heavily dictates the framing of the walls on either side of the door. What I ended up deciding to do was to build a door 3 feet wide to accommodate the exact same panel that we used on the roof. And then I split the difference with whatever remained to frame out the walls on each side of the door. So as you can see, I went ahead and got that measurement. I secured a bottom plate by strapping some boards temporarily to the outside of the building just as a positive stop to make sure everything was exactly parallel with the pressure-treated rim joist below. And then I cut studs a custom height based on the distance from those fresh bottom plates to the rafter tie above. And these are identical measurements. I don't know what the measurements were, but it is slightly below my head height, and I am at risk of hitting my head, but I decided I wanted a stronger wall rather than a more convenient door height. But so far, as long as I take a step in and wait to elevate my head until I get inside, then I won't bonk my head. But there have been a couple times over the past few months where I accidentally did hit my head, and it wasn't that big of a deal. If you're building your own coop, you can build it whatever height you want. I just wanted to keep it as compact as possible while also offering the most space. And similar to the back of the building, I attached the linoleum to the pressure-treated bottom plate with zip tape. When I framed the door opening, I forgot to account for that extra 2 inches on the end of the roofing panel. So instead of reframing it, I decided to just cut it off. The dimensions of this piece of metal are now 3 foot by 6 foot. And I'm not quite 6 feet tall, but the top of the door is going to be below the top of my head because I want the metal to overlap the pressure-treated rim joist where you see the black zip tape at the bottom. And I wanted that just to have a clean design, but also to shed any water trickling down the wall away from the framing material. Next, I measure the rough opening of the door. That's the horizontal distance between these 2 studs and the vertical distance between the linoleum floor and the 2x4 header above. That gives me the maximum dimensions that the door can be. I like to undersize the door just a bit to give it proper clearance to swing without getting hung up in the rough opening. So I undersize it by a ½ inch. Then I cut 2 matching 2x4s for the top and the bottom, and then 2 more matching 2x4s for the left and the right. And then I use the pocket screws to assemble a rectangle on the floor. And that's my mock-up of the door, and I can use my speed square or the 3-4-5 method with my tape measure to make sure it's square. And then I'm using a slightly over-length diagonal piece to act as the hypotenuse to brace this door permanently. And the easiest way I've figured out to create a brace is to lay it on the assembled mock-up of the door and then just simply trace your angles. It's too complicated to calculate these, in my opinion, so just tracing them with a pencil will give you a good guideline where to cut, and then you can really just wedge it in there with a hammer, making sure not to pull it out of square too much. Just make sure that when you install this framed door, the brace goes from the bottom of the hinge side to the top of the swing side, because it can only prevent sag in one direction, and a lot of people get this wrong. Each butt joint in this design uses 2 pocket screws, including the diagonal brace. So this has 12 pocket screws total, 2 for each corner, and 2 for each end of the diagonal brace. Now that this is mocked up and assembled, it's time to put the hinge on and get it attached to that stud, and then attach the metal. And I'm using that overlap method I mentioned before, where it sheds water straight to the ground. And I'm also using those same neoprene gasketed screws that I used for the sheet metal on the rest of this project. That door turned out way better than I imagined it would. It's probably my best designed door yet, and the diagonal brace is locked in there so tight that this thing will never sag. So now it's time to patch up the rest of the siding on the front of this coop. I'm using the same technique with the grinder to cut these to length to install horizontally with the same screws as the rest of the project. The only difference is that I'm adding a little bit of extra slack on the metal so it can fold around on the inside of the door jamb on both sides. And that's just there as a precaution to make sure there's no rough edges sticking out on the outside of the building. Eventually, I'm going to have to cover the corners of the building with some sort of trim to keep out any rodents that might be able to fit through those little triangular V notches on the edges of the panels. Now I'm tackling the right side of the door the same way that I did the left side. I'm basically just bringing the elevation up to the horizontal header located just above the door. And then for the final piece, I'm cutting a full triangle to fit perfectly above the doorway. And I achieve that by measuring the angle of the roof pitch and transferring that using a chalk line to the metal panel. And that wraps it up for the siding. And now we just have to move on to the finishing touches. The first upgrade to the door is to install a handle. I'm centering this vertically, and I'm using a marker so I know exactly where the screw placement needs to be. One of my favorite metal tools is this awl. It's very strong, and it's a bit dull now, but it still works. And I'm pre-punching because these screws are not self-tapping. And if you've ever tried to get a screw through metal that's not self-tapping, you'll know how annoying it is. But just use an awl, or if you have a sturdy nail, you can use that as an awl as well. But now this is ready to open and close. I mentioned before that we're using the deep litter method for the floor of this chicken coop. I already have the linoleum in place, and I made sure to install that before any of the framing, so the bottom plates of these walls, combined with the weight of the roof above, would really cinch down the linoleum and have a good waterproof surface for the chicken poop. But as an added precaution, we will have 6 to 8 inches of wood chips that we typically buy in bulk from Tractor Supply down on the floor. I anticipate we probably need like 5 or 6 bags to achieve that depth, but that will allow us to keep the poop building up, and then we'll only have to rake it out once a year. But we don't want poop corroding this metal siding. So I'm going to install blocking at the bottom 8 or so inches all the way around their chicken room right here. So you can see I'm using those reclaimed boards that I used for the rafters. These are actually the cutoff scraps from the end of the rafters. It's a good way to use up waste. And then I had to find whatever scraps of 2x4s I had around to lay over that on their side. It's essentially like fire blocking in residential construction, but this is so no poop covered wood chips go down between the siding and the perimeter blocking. I'm intentionally cutting and installing these to be as snug as possible, so I don't even need fasteners. But just for added precaution, I am using my nail gun to secure these from both sides, just in case something ever kicks these, they will not break loose. And I don't know if this is the most common method, but this is just the method that I decided to use. I'm sure if you had some sheathing scraps or maybe some flooring, you could potentially run it up the walls high enough to where nothing will ever fall behind it. So with all these doors and partition walls, you might be wondering how the chickens are meant to get in to their coop. Well, that's where this little hatch comes in. I'm actually going to salvage our solar-powered, solar sensing chicken door that we had on our old chicken coop. You can see next to me, to the left of this hole, there is a pre-assembled PVC frame that is a ladies first chicken door. And so the bottom half is the opening, and the top half is where the door retracts to when it's not being used. There's also a couple wires coming out of it, one for an override switch that allows you to switch it to auto, which is solar sensing mode, or open or close manually. And then there's a wire going to a small solar panel that recharges the standard rechargeable batteries that are located inside the hatch. So I've installed this enough times to where I have a general idea of how I want it to work. I basically want a minimally sized hole that matches identically to the hole in that PVC frame. The only problem I encountered here was that it's designed to mount to a flush wall, whereas this has horizontal 5V ribs going across it. So I had to notch out the ribs just where the PVC framing needs to sit. And I also left some extra slack on the metal that I cut out so I could fold it around the corner. I don't want to have any abrasive edges that the chickens could potentially step on and slice their feet open. And you might be wondering, well, what about the edges of the metal that I folded? Well, those are going to be tacked down with roofing nails and then covered with zip tape for a waterproof seal. I recommend using a waterproof product anywhere chicken feet might encounter exposed wood, because their feet tend to get poopy and wet, and you want to protect the wood as long as possible. So I'm using my awl here to create some pilot holes, and then that'll make the wood screws penetrate a lot easier. And now I'm finally doing the finishing touches now that I know that it fits. There's 4 screws holding this assembly to the structure, and I'm putting in a ton of these little roofing nails because I don't have much use for them. I just want to use them up. And now I'm going to apply that last layer of zip tape.
We've been using this for years without issue, but every 2 years or so, we need to replace the rechargeable batteries. Not that big of a deal. I went ahead and mounted the override switch up here, just because we need somewhere out of the rain to keep it, just in case it's so dark that we need to, for some reason, open this coop. Let's see if it works. I'm going to switch it to auto. The light sensor is going to detect the sun, and hopefully, since it's daytime, it'll know to open. So let's see how it goes. There it goes. Slow and steady. There's a threaded rod that goes up to a motor, and it spins around. I've had to put some WD-40 in it maybe once or twice over the 5 years or so that we've had it. You can see it's pretty slow. The chickens all like to cram around this, trying to get through while it's opening. But after a minute or so, it should be fully open. You can see I covered the abrasive edges with zip tape, and I also held them down with some really tiny roofing nails, which are a pain to install. Now all I need to do is throw a brick down here or make some sort of ramp, just in case any injured birds want to go up or down. I'm sure if they're healthy, they can jump that high because it's only about a foot off the ground. So that's it for today. I'm going to put up a tarp because I haven't been able to find any chicken wire, the correct dimension, to build this partition wall. And the only reason I want to put up a tarp is because I want to put their bedding down in their main room. And that's going to be maybe like 7 or 8 inches for a whole year before we replace it. And I don't want them coming out into the clean floor here where my tools are stored and pooping. I'm going to keep my tools in here at least until I can finish this building, finish that partition wall, get the chicken wire up. I think it's safe to say that I've beat the big storm that's coming tomorrow. And Angie did some research and determined that if we can put some fencing around this and clip their wings so they don't fly over the fencing, and that'll force them to go in and out this door instead of reverting back to their old coop, which would not be safe necessarily from the wind because I've removed the door. So we really want them to come in here for the night. So I'm going to get the shavings down, get that tarp up, and let them go to bed.
I have a scrap of fencing here that's a remnant of an old fencing project we did in Raleigh, and it actually comes in handy to be used as a corral. If it's in a circle formation, it tends to stand up under its own weight, but with a semicircle like this, I find it easier to clamp one end to something rigid, in this case, the side of the chicken coop.
It's almost dinner time, so I need to get going. But I almost forgot one of the most important components, and that is the perch. So I'm going to just tack a 2x4 across like this. I know square is not very ergonomic. I do plan to cut down a tree, a small tree from the woods, and mount it, but I don't have time. So that's going to be their perch for the next night or two.
So me and Cedar here are opening up a few bags of wood chips from Tractor Supply, and we're going to pour them all over the floor just to see how thick of loft we can get for our deep litter method. It's possible that I'll have to add a couple more bags later, but for now we're just having some fun trying to get all of this down just for a few birds to spend a few nights in here.
Here they come! Come on in, everyone. Uh-oh. They haven't figured it out. Come on, birds. Hey, Cedar, can you stand over here? You're blocking the door that they need to go through. Come on, buckies. These girls don't understand. All right. Here they come. All right, this is going to take a while.
We managed to get our small flock cooped up just before a rainstorm. Now they'll have a fresh and dry place to roost for the stormy night. But we needed to figure out a way to keep them contained just outside the coop so they would know where the door is each night until they can get acclimated. So that's what we're using our meat bird chicken tractor for.
Are the eggs in the hole?
Yeah, I do.
How many?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, our chickens have been living in here just fine for the last few weeks. But now that we got 21 new birds, we need to adjust the perch in here. This has always been a temporary perch. I know it's square, not very comfortable. It's just a 2x4 that's 8 feet long. This building, siding to siding, the width is 8 feet. So what I'm going to do is cut a few small trees, maybe like
2 to 3 inches diameter into 8-foot lengths. So then we can fit 3 across here. We have the other flock penned up right now, and they have some of those logs in it. So I'm just gonna probably install 2 right now as a proof of concept. But I'm basically gonna repurpose that board, run it across the side, and that'll give us the flexibility to move the perches anywhere along that 8-foot span. Sort of like 2 rails.
We have another episode on YouTube about how we inherited a flock of chickens from our neighbors who had to move out of town and how we quarantined them and incorporated them into our flock. But basically, I had to get these roosts set up to handle 30 birds. And based on my calculations, this coop has a maximum of 30. So we got very lucky inheriting the exact amount of birds that our chicken coop could handle. This is what it looks like. Here's a close-up of the 2 new roosting bars, which are essentially trees. And once we incorporate the new flock into the coop, I will repurpose one of their perches, which you can see there in the background inside of that chicken tractor. We like to keep them up off the ground in case it rains. And once they're elevated, they're also there under the tarp, which can keep them dry and shielded from the wind. So you can see our rooster there, little Speck. He is monitoring his new hens, and I think he's pretty excited to meet them face to face when he gets the chance. And we hope that these hens are pretty receptive of him being the new rooster to monitor them, because the roosters that they were used to were much larger, probably about twice the size of Speck there. So we've had them incorporated actually for a couple months now, and I can tell you from experience that things are going pretty smoothly. Here is a shot of all of them feeding together. All right, YouTube. It's time to sign off because this movie is dragging on, but I'm really just trying to give you all the information that I have about how I built this coop. But before I say goodbye, let me just take you on a final tour. We've been using this coop for months. We have it jam-packed in this foyer with all sorts of supplies. We have beekeeping supplies, chicken supplies, meat bird supplies. We even set up a brooding space over here, which is now full of food because we don't have any chicks. But here's a lamp here. We had this egg box, which I assembled off camera. It ended up not being a big hit. Some of the smaller hens like to use it, but the larger hens, they like to use these milk crates. Hey, settle down, little bird. They're just laying all over the place. 2 eggs there in the middle. 4 eggs over there. 1 egg in the little roosting box. Let me get out of here so I can talk to you without that squawking. But when I built that nesting box, we just assumed we would have... This chicken followed me out just to squawk in my face. All right, let me come back in here. When we built this nesting box, the intention was to have our 8 existing hens taking turns going into that box. We got like 20 more hens, and so that ended up becoming an issue. We still don't have a good permanent nesting box situation, which is why they lay all over there. We just have to be diligent and collect their eggs multiple times a day to make sure they're not all poopy and broken. We do have a couple hens that seem to enjoy eating eggs. So as long as we can get to the eggs before them, then it works. But I ended up building a ramp here. We have meat bird production over there. Anyway, we have a lot going on. It's going to be very difficult for me to keep up with my schedule of videos every other week. But if you want to leave a comment down below about what you'd really like to see, I'll do my best to try to record some content for you guys. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that subscribe button, and I will see you back here next time on Kind Heart Homestead. Hope you guys have a great summer. Goodbye.